Hello again, everybody. Welcome again to the reading series entitled 5G Into the Abyss. Took a couple days off just because I had a little bit of work to do, and now I'm back at 4 o'clock, 4 p.m. Pacific time, standing on my virtual balcony, opening my virtual window and reading texts that inspire me into reflection during times of pause, when the veil of what keeps us from seeing the abyss gets a little thinner. So during this time of COVID and stay-at-home orders, I find the words of certain writers to be great reflective tools for me to just take stock as to what we might need to have or recalibrate as society starts up again. So today we continue with section 4 of Friedrich Nietzsche's Schopenhauer as Educator. This is his third untimely meditation out of a series of 4 short essays that he wrote when he was quite young, in his 20s. And this is translated and with notes by Daniel Pellerin. And again, I'm picking up on section 4. So if you want to catch up, there are earlier sections in this 5G Into the Abyss playlist. So here we go. Never mind if the last hint remains a little opaque. Right now, I am getting at something very easily understood. Namely, how we may all use Schopenhauer to educate ourselves against our times, because we have the advantage through him of really knowing our times, if it is indeed an advantage. At any rate, it may no longer be possible a few centuries from now. I take delight in imagining that human beings will soon tire of their books and writers, and that one day a scholar will come to his senses, make his will, and provide for his corpse to be burned on a pyre made of his tomes, his own writings topmost. What with our forests getting even scarcer, will it not be time before long to use our libraries for firewood, for straw and kindling? Since most books are made of smoke and steam anyway, why not return them to same condition? Let them be punished by fire for not containing any fire within them. And so it is quite possible that the future may look back upon our age as a dark age, because its products so enticed us to throw them into the oven. How lucky we may therefore count ourselves that we still have a chance to get to know this age. For if it ever makes sense to concern oneself with one's age, then it must be a blessing to do so as thoroughly as possible, lest anything remain doubtful about it. And that is what Schopenhauer allows us to do. Granted, we would be 100 times luckier still if our examination were to reveal that no age ever gave greater cause for pride and hope than our own. And there are some naive folks in remote parts of this earth, say in Germany, who are ready to believe just such a thing, who say quite seriously that the world was set right a couple of years ago, and that anyone who might harbor grave doubts about existence has been proved wrong by the facts. There it is. With the foundation of the new German Reich, we are told the decisive, devastating blow has been struck against all pessimistic philosophizing, and that is supposed to be that. So if anyone wishes to answer the question what it might mean for a philosopher to be an educator in our times, he must first respond to that view, which is very widespread and much cherished, especially in the universities. Well, let it be done like this. It is a disgrace and an outrage that such a disgusting, idolatrous flattering of our times could possibly be voiced and repeated by so-called thinking and respectable human beings. What it proves is that men today do not have so much as an inkling of how far the serious business of philosophy is removed from the serious business of of the newspapers. Such human beings have forfeited not only the last remnants of philosophy, but the remains of religion as well. And what they have bargained for instead is not optimism, as they imagine it, but journalism, the spirit of the day and the dailies, or rather, lack thereof. Any philosophy that would have us believe that a political event can shift or even solve the problem of existence must be a jest, or else it is an excrescence. The founding of a state is nothing very new in the world. That drama has been staged many times before. How could a political renewal suffice for making men merry dwellers on this earth once and for all? If anyone can really believe such a thing to be possible, let him identify himself. He truly deserves to be made a professor of philosophy at a German university, like Harms in Berlin, Jürgen Meyer in Bonn, and Carrier in Munich. What we see here are the consequences of the doctrine, lately preached from every rooftop, that the state is the highest end of mankind and that there can be no higher duty for a man than to serve his state, which I take to be a relapse not into paganism, but into idiocy. It is possible that a man who sees his services to the state as his highest duty would indeed be unaware of any higher obligations. But there are nonetheless men and duties that go further. And one such duty, which I at least take to be higher than any duty towards the state, is the call to demolish stupidity in all its forms, including this one. That is why I am dealing here with a kind of man whose teleology points a little further than the welfare of the state, namely with the philosopher, and with a world that is largely independent of the state, namely the world of culture. Of the many rings that make for human community, when they are all linked up to each other, some are made of gold, others of tombak. How then would a philosopher look upon the culture of our age? Very differently, to be sure, for those merry professors of philosophy who are so comfortable in their states. To the philosopher, it would look as if our culture were in the process of being uprooted and nearly driven to extinction by our universal breathlessness, the ever-increasing velocity of life, and the loss of all leisurely contemplation and simplicity. The waters of religion are ebbing away, leaving behind swamps or puddles. The nations are once again riven with enmity and desire only to tear one another apart. The sciences are rushing ahead without measure and in the spirit of the blindest laissez-faire, shattering and dissolving all that was believed to be solid. Meanwhile, the well-schooled classes and states are allowing themselves to be swept along by the splendors of contempt and commerce. Never was the world more worldly, and never was it poorer in love and kindness. No longer do the learned serve as beacons or refuges amidst the ever worldlier unrest. They too are becoming more restless, more thoughtless, more loveless by the day. Everything tends towards the barbarism of the future, today's arts and sciences included. The well-schooled man has degenerated into the greatest enemy of education because he persists in denying the illness before the doctors and getting in their way. They get bitterly vexed, these pitiful, strutting scoundrels, when one exposes their weakness or resists their pernicious mendacity. They would have us believe that they have won first prize in the great race of the centuries, and there is an artificial jolliness to all their movements. Their way of faking happiness can be a little touching because their happiness is so very incomprehensible. One even hesitates to confront them with the question Tannhäuser asked Bitterloff, quote, "What delights have you poor wretch ever enjoyed?" End quote. For we know better, alas. The frost of winter is upon our day, and we live beside the cragged mountains where danger is rife and provisions are scarce. Our joys are fleeting, and all sunlight pales as it creeps down to us from the white peaks above. Suddenly there is music. An old man cranks his barrel organ, and dancers twirl about. A shocking thing for the lone wanderer to witness. Everything that surrounds him is so wild, so inaccessible, so colorless, so hopeless. Yet now the air is ringing with the sound of joy, of thoughtless, noisy joy. Alas, the mists of early evening are already lurking. Soon the music falls silent, and only the wanderer's steps grind on. As far as the eye can see, nothing remains but the barren and harsh face of nature. If it be thought too one-sided for us to focus only on the feebleness of the lines and the dullness of the colors in the picture of modern life, may we turn to the other side, but only to discover that it is by no means more pleasing, but rather more alarming still. Certainly there are great forces at play, enormous forces, wild, primeval, entirely merciless, upon which one can only look with expectant trepidation, as upon the cauldron in a witch's kitchen. At any moment there might be a flash, a bolt of lightning that announces the advent of new terrors. The past 100 years have been preparing us for all manner of fundamental upheavals, and recent efforts at setting up the powers of the so-called nation state as a bulwark against the modern tendency towards collapse or explosion will only aggravate the general insecurity and foreboding for the foreseeable future. The fact that so many individuals carry on as if they knew nothing of such worries need not detain us. Their agitation reveals clearly enough what they really think. Thus, we see them more frenzied and more obsessed with their own little affairs than human beings ever have been. They build and plant only for the day, and the pursuit of happiness will never be more urgent than when the quarry must be hunted down before the nightfall, since the day after the hunting season may be over for good. Thus, we live in the age of the atom, of atomized chaos. During the Middle Ages, warring forces were generally held together and more or less assimilated to one another by the great pressure brought to bear upon them by the Church. When that bond was broken, the forces rose up against one another with all the old fury. The Reformation declared many things to be adiaphora, that is, indifferent, in the sense of not falling under the immediate jurisdiction of religious principles. That was the price at which Protestantism brought its right to exist, just as Christianity had once purchased its survival at a similar price from a much more religious age. The chasm between the worldly and the religious realms has kept widening, and today nearly everything on earth is determined by the most brutal and vile forces only, namely by the egotism of property owners and the despotism of the military. In the hands of the military despots, the state seeks to reorganize everything in its own image, as does the egotism of the property owners, and thus to the new bond by which pressure is kept on the warring forces. In other words, the state wants men to serve it with the same idolatrous devotion with which they once worshipped the church. With what success remains to be seen. As yet, we are still floating among the ice shoals in the great stream of the Middle Ages. The thaw has set in, and everything has been set in massive, devastating motion, one towering block of ice crashing into another. The banks flooded and endangered. Revolution is inescapable. The atomic revolution, which will turn out to be the smallest indivisible particles of modern society. There is no doubt that when such periods are approaching, that which is humane is perhaps in even greater danger than during the actual collapse and the chaotic turbulences themselves. Fearful anticipation and the greedy exploitation of every remaining minute is bound to bring out every craven and selfish impulse of the soul, while real calamities, especially when they are truly great and shared in common, tend rather to improve men and leave them more empathetic. In light of these dangers facing our times, who will serve as the guardians and paladins of the humane? That inviolably sacred treasure gradually accumulated in the common temple of mankind by the successive generations of man? Who will uphold the image of man when all around his contemporaries are degenerated into the point of beastliness, succumbing to worm-like selfishness and dog-like fear, and even lower to the dead rigidity of mere machines? There are three images of man that our modern age has posited one after the other, so that mortal men may, for a long time yet, have occasion for exalting their own lives by contemplating them. There is Rousseau's man, Goethe's man, and lastly, Schopenhauer's man. The first image has most fire in it, and it is sure to have the most popular impact. The second is intended only for the few, namely for those who are contemplative natures in the grand style. The masses will only misunderstand it. The third requires the most active men as its viewers. Only they may gaze upon it without harm. The easygoing will find it enervating, and the masses repellent. Behind the first of our images, there is the force that drives mankind towards the tempestuous revolutions, past and present, for underneath all the socialist quaking and shaking of the earth, it has always been Rousseau's man agitating things, like old typhus beneath the Aetna. Oppressed and half crushed by haughty lords and merciless wealth, made coarse and contemptible in their own eyes by priests, bad upbringings, and ridiculous customs, men in their despair call upon sacred nature, and suddenly feel that she is as remote from them as any Epicurean god. Their prayers do not reach her, so deeply has mankind sunk into the chaos of the unnatural. With a sneer, man then casts off all the glittering finery that he considered his most human possessions not long before, his arts and sciences, the advantages of a refined life. He beats his fist against the walls in whose shadows he has degenerated and cries for light, for sun, forest, soaring rock. And when he calls out, quote, only nature is good, only natural man is human, end quote, he despises himself and yearns to go beyond himself, a mood in which the soul is ready for the most terrible decisions, but in which it may also bring to the surface what is noblest and rarest in its depths. Goethe's man is no such menacing force. Indeed, he may, in a certain sense, be called a quieting corrective for that dangerous excitement to which Rousseau's man is so prone. When Goethe was young, he clung to the gospel of good nature with all his love-rich heart. His Faust was the highest and most daring depiction of Rousseau's man, at least insofar as there was any way of conveying his ravenous hunger for life, his dissatisfaction and yearning, his dealings with the demons of the heart. Let us look what resulted from all this gathering of clouds. Certainly no bolt of lightning. What is revealed to us here is precisely a new image of man, that of Goethean man. One might have thought that Faust should be presented as the champion of hard-pressed life, as an insatiable rebel, a liberator, as the personification of the power that negates out of goodness, as the quintessential genius of subversion, equally religious and demonic, in contrast to his quite undemonic companion, of whom he cannot rid himself and whose skeptical wickedness and negativity he must despise even as he uses them for his own ends. The tragic lot of all rebels and liberators. But one would have been mistaken to expect any such thing. Goethe's man carefully avoids the company of Rousseau's man because he hates violence and all great leaps, and thus all great deeds. Thus the liberator of the world, Faust, becomes a mere world traveler. The insatiable voyeur flies past all the dominions of life and nature, past all histories, arts, myths, and past all sciences. His deepest desires are excited and placated. Even Helen can hold him no longer. And now the moment must come for which his scornful companion has been waiting. At some point the flight must end, the wings must fall, and Mephistopheles is ready. When a German ceases to be Faust, there is no greater danger than that he may turn Philistine and go to the devil. Only the powers of heaven can save him. Goethe's man is, as I have said, contemplative man in the grand style, who can keep himself from wasting away on earth only by gathering together for his nourishment all that has ever been great and remarkable, and by living as if there were nothing to life but one desire after another. He is not a man of action. Whether he takes his place among active men in the prevailing order of things, one can be sure that nothing worthwhile will come of it. Witness Goethe's own zeal for the theater, and that nothing orderly will be upset. Goethe's man is a conserving and conciliating force, as much at risk of degenerating into a Philistine as Rousseau's man of turning into a Catilinarian. Only add a little more muscle and natural wildness, and all the virtues of the former would be enhanced. It seems that Goethe's man knew well wherein the dangers and shortcomings of his kind of man lay, as he hints in Jarno's words to Wilhelm Meister. It is all very well that you are so morose and bitter. If only you were to become properly vicious for a change, it would be better still. To put it bluntly, it is necessary that we all become properly vicious for a change so that things might get better. The image of a Schopenhauerian man should be in encouragement to us in doing so. Such a man takes the voluntary sufferings of truthfulness upon himself, and what he suffers helps him to subdue his egocentrism and to prepare the complete revolution and reversal in his nature that is the essential meaning of life. His unguarded expression of what is true may sound inexcusable to other men, because they consider the preservation of their half-truths and inanities to be a matter of humane duty. One would have to be evil, they think, to want to destroy their toys. To anyone of that sort, they would be tempted to cry out what Faust said to Mephistopheles, quote, "How dare you, frigid fiend, raise your fist against the teeming, healing powers of creation," end quote. Anyone aspiring to live according to the Schopenhauerian ideal would probably look more like a Mephistopheles than a Faust, at least to myopic modern eyes that cannot see more than evil in a negation. But there is a way of negating and destroying that springs precisely from a powerful yearning for sanctification and redemption. And Schopenhauer was the first philosophical teacher to appear with that message before us, profane and utterly secularized modern human beings. All existence that can be negated also deserves to be negated. To live most truly would be to believe in an existence that cannot be negated at all because it is so true and free of all falsehood. That is why the man who is truthful in the highest sense finds a metaphysical meaning in his actions, a meaning that can be explained by laws of a superior kind and that is affirming in the most profound sense, even if it appears to break and destroy the laws of this life. The actions of such a man must involve him in a continuous suffering, but he knows what Meister Eckhart did, quote, "The beast that will carry you most swiftly towards perfection is suffering," end quote. I would think that anyone who places such a direction of life before his soul would feel his heart opening up with the fervent desire to be a Schopenhauerian man, that is, to be marvelously pure and serene and altogether unworried about his own welfare, to be far removed from the cold and contemptuous neutrality of the so-called scientific man, to be raised high above any grouchy and morose outlook, to always be prepared for offering himself up as the first sacrifice to the revealed truth, and to be permeated to his core with the awareness of how much suffering must result from such truthfulness. Certainly, such a man will destroy his worldly prospects by his courage. He will have to be hostile even towards the human beings he loves best and the institutions that nurture him. He must not spare either men or things, even if it hurts him to be injuring them, and he will be misunderstood and long mistaken for an accomplice of powers that he in fact abominates. When he is judged by common human standards, he will be found unjust, even while he is striving for nothing but justice. He may reassure and console himself with the words of Schopenhauer, his great educator, quote, "A happy life is impossible. The most a man can achieve in this world is to chart a heroic course through life. To live thus is to fight on behalf of all, whatever one's particular manner or cause, and to do so against overwhelming opposition and for little or no reward when one emerges victorious at last. In the end, such a man will be left standing like the prince in Carlo Gozzi's The Stag King, petrified but retaining his noble posture and magnanimous bearing. His memory remains to be celebrated by later generations as that of a hero. His will mortified by a lifetime of troubles and labors, by paltry success and the ingratitude of the world, is extinguished in nirvana," end quote. Of course, such a heroic life and the mortification wrought upon it hardly corresponds to the feeble ideas of those who give the longest speeches at festivities commemorating great men, and who believe that great men must be great in just the same way as they themselves are small, as if greatness were just given as a present for a man's own entertainment, or as if it were attained mechanically by a blind obedience to some inner compulsion, so that he who does not receive any present and feels no compulsion might claim the same right to be small that another has to be great. Given as a present, or by compulsion. These are disdainful words spoken so that by slighting those who have heard the call to greatness, one might evade any such call oneself. In fact, great men are least amenable to presence or compulsion. They know as well as others how one can make an easy life for oneself, how soft a bed awaits anyone who is prepared to get along with his neighbors in the polite and ordinary fashion. For all human order is designed to prevent life from being felt by continuously distracting our minds. Why does the great man have such a strong desire for the opposite, namely the feeling for life, that is to say, for suffering from life? Because he realizes that he is at risk of being cheated out of himself, that there is a kind of conspiracy to lure him from his own cave. So he balks, pricks up his ears, and decides, I will hold on to myself. It is a terrible resolution as soon as he realizes, for now he must plunge down into the very depths of existence with a number of unusual questions on his lips. Why am I alive? What lessons am I supposed to learn from life? How have I become what I am? And why does what I am cause me so much suffering? So he torments himself as nobody else seems to be doing. Meanwhile, he watches his contemporaries passionately convulsing themselves before every phantom scene staged for them in the theater of politics, or he sees them strutting about in 100 masks, parading as young men or grown men or old men, as fathers, citizens, priests, civil servants, or businessmen, ever so intent on their collective comedy, while showing not the least interest in themselves. Asked why it is that they are alive, they would all answer quickly and with pride, so that I may become a good citizen, a scholar, or a statesman. And yet what they are now will never be anything other than it is. So why be that poor thing and not something better? A man who understands his life as no more than a point in the evolution of a family or a state or a science, who therefore wishes to be entirely swallowed up by the story of becoming, by history, has failed to understand the lesson that existence has assigned him, and he will have to repeat it. The eternal spectacle of becoming is nothing but a treacherous puppet show that makes men forget themselves, a real distraction that draws the individual out of himself and scatters him in all directions, an endless game of trifles put on for us and put over on us by that oversized infant time. To be heroically truthful, then, is nothing other than to stop being a plaything. Everything about becoming is hollow, deceptive, shallow, and deserving of our contempt. The riddle that man is meant to solve can be solved only from within being, by being just what one is and nothing else in timeless abiding. Now a man may begin to examine how deeply he is connected with becoming, and how deeply with being, and thus an enormous challenge arises before his soul, to destroy all that is mere becoming, to drag everything that is false about things into the light. He too wishes for complete insight, but in a different way than the Goethean man, not for the sake of a noble delicateness, so that he might preserve himself and delight in the delicious diversity of things, but rather by being his own first sacrifice. The heroic man looks with disdain upon whether he is well or unwell, upon his own virtues and vices, upon the whole business of reducing the world to the puny measure of man. He hopes for nothing from himself, and wishes to look upon that very bottom of things where hope has no place. His strength lies in his ability to forget himself, and when he does remember himself, he scans the distance between himself and his lofty goal, and sees only soot and dregs behind and below himself. The ancient thinkers sought with all their might to discover happiness and truth, and no one shall ever find what he has to search for, says the harsh degree of nature. Instead, let a man search out untruth everywhere. Let him be willing to welcome unhappiness freely, and perhaps he will find something miraculously disillusioned in a different sense. Something inexpressible may come within his reach, something beside which our concepts of happiness and truth are mere idolatrous images. The world sheds its heaviness. The affairs and powers that be on earth fade like dreams, and everything around him is bathed in the gentle radiance of a summer's eve. To the observer, it looks as if he's just beginning to wake, and as if what he is seeing at play around him are merely the thinning clouds of a dissolving dream. These too will soon have wafted away, and then it will be day. I promised that I would go by my own experiences and depict Schopenhauer as an educator, so far as the imperfect strokes of my brush will permit. Therefore, it cannot be enough for me to paint merely the human ideal that enveloped him, his Platonic idea, as it were. I will have to do something much more difficult and show how one might gain a new circle of duties if one were guided by that ideal, how one might draw close to so ambitious an end through regular activity. In short, how one might be educated by the ideal. For otherwise, it might appear to be no more than a gladdening or even intoxicating view that grants us a few moments of bliss only in order to let us down soon after and leave us feeling all the more despondent. It is true that our initial dealings with the Schopenhauerian ideal must follow a pattern that is as old as our ideals themselves, light alternating with darkness, our ecstasy with our disgust. But that is merely the threshold over which we should not linger. Let us step quickly through the doorway and beyond our first beginnings. That is the end of section 5. I think we have one more section. Once we get past this last section, that is the end of Schopenhauer as Educator by Nietzsche. It's been a pleasure to be reading this with you, and I will be reading other texts after this. Thanks for tuning in. After I finish Schopenhauer's Educator, I have a special guest reading, I believe on Friday. So tune in again, and I look forward to meeting you again on this balcony. Thanks.